baker saw a starving little boy looking at some bread and handed him some after feeling sorry. When the owner of the bakery saw what he did, he fired the baker immediately. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, filling the small bakery with its comforting scent. Peter stood behind the counter, his flour-dusted apron a testament to the morning's work. At 35, he had the kind of face that seemed perpetually youthful, with laugh lines etched around his warm brown eyes. His calloused hands, strong from years of kneading dough, moved with practiced ease as he arranged a tray of golden croissants in the display case. "Another beautiful day," he murmured to himself, glancing out the large front window at the bustling street beyond. The early morning sun cast a gentle glow over the cobblestone sidewalk, where the first customers of the day were already making their way to work. The bell above the door chimed, and Mr. Higgins, the bakery owner, strode in. His polished shoes clicked against the tile floor as he made his way to the back office, barely acknowledging Peter with a curt nod. "Good morning, Mr. Higgins," Peter called out cheerfully, undeterred by his boss's cold demeanor. He'd worked at Higgins Bakery for nearly a decade now, and he'd long since grown accustomed to the owner's brusque manner. As the morning wore on, a steady stream of regulars filed in and out of the shop. Peter greeted each one by name, asking about their families or commenting on the weather. Mrs. Thompson, a retired school teacher, lingered at the counter to chat. "Peter, dear, these cinnamon rolls are simply divine," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I don't know how you do it, but they seem to get better every week." Peter laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the shop. "That's very kind of you to say, Mrs. Thompson. I think the secret ingredient might just be a dash of love." As Mrs. Thompson left, Peter's gaze drifted back to the window. His smile faded slightly as he noticed a small figure standing outside, nose pressed against the glass. It was a boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with tousled brown hair and clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame. The child's eyes were fixed on the display of fresh bread loaves, a look of longing clear on his face. Peter's heart clenched. He'd seen the boy around town before, always alone, always looking a little lost. Glancing around to make sure Mr. Higgins wasn't nearby, Peter quickly wrapped up a warm loaf of bread and made his way to the door. "Hey there, little fella," he said softly, crouching down to the boy's eye level. "You look like you could use a little pick-me-up. How about some fresh bread?" The boy's eyes widened, darting between Peter's face and the bread in his hands. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took the loaf, clutching it to his chest like a precious treasure. "Thank you, mister," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Peter smiled, ruffling the boy's hair gently. "You're very welcome. Now run along and enjoy that, okay?" As the boy scampered off, Peter stood up, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. He turned to head back inside, only to find himself face to face with Mr. Higgins, whose expression was thunderous. "What do you think you're doing?" Mr. Higgins hissed, his face reddening. "Giving away my merchandise? That's theft, plain and simple." Peter held up his hands placatingly. "Mr. Higgins, please. It was just one loaf, and the poor boy looked half-starved. I'll pay for it myself, I promise." But Mr. Higgins was beyond reason. "I've had enough of your bleeding heart nonsense, Peter. You're fired. Get out of my shop, now!" Peter stood there, stunned, as Mr. Higgins stormed back inside. Through the window, he could see curious customers watching the scene unfold. Slowly, he untied his apron and hung it on the hook by the door. With a heavy heart, he took one last look at the bakery that had been his second home for so long, then turned and walked away. As he made his way down the street, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. How would he pay his rent? What would he do now? But even as these worries swirled in his mind, Peter couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. The memory of the boy's grateful face was enough to reassure him that he'd done the right thing. Little did Peter know that this act of kindness, which had cost him his job, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. Peter trudged home, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The small apartment he called home felt emptier than usual as he slumped onto his worn sofa. Running a hand through his hair, he let out a deep sigh. "What now?" he muttered to himself, the weight of uncertainty settling on his shoulders. As the afternoon light filtered through his curtains, Peter's phone buzzed incessantly. News of his firing had spread through the tight-knit community like wildfire. Messages of support flooded in, each one a testament to the impact he'd had on the town over the years. "Peter, we heard what happened. How could Mr. Higgins do such a thing?" Read a text from Sarah, the local librarian. "That's not right, man. You were the heart of that bakery." Another message from Tom, the mailman, popped up. A knock at the door startled Peter from his reverie. He opened it to find Mrs. Thompson standing there, a determined look on her kind face. "Peter, dear," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've just heard the most dreadful news. Is it true that awful Mr. Higgins fired you for helping a child?" Peter nodded, a rueful smile on his face. "I'm afraid so, Mrs. Thompson. But please, don't worry about me. I'll figure something out." Mrs. Thompson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Nonsense! The whole town is in an uproar. Nobody can believe how heartless that man is. Why, I've already heard talk of people boycotting the bakery." As if on cue, Peter's phone chimed again. It was a local news alert. "Community rallies behind fired baker. Boycott of Higgins. Bakery begins." Peter's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh no, that's not what I wanted at all. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." Mrs. Thompson patted his arm reassuringly. "You're not causing trouble, dear. You're inspiring people to stand up for what's right. Now tell me, what are your plans?" Peter shrugged helplessly. "I honestly don't know, Mrs. Thompson. Baking is all I've ever known, all I've ever wanted to do. But starting over, it seems impossible." As they talked, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. Mrs. Thompson eventually left, but not before making Peter promise to keep his chin up. "Something will turn up," she assured him. "You'll see." The next morning, Peter woke to the sound of his phone ringing. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello," he answered groggily. "Is this Peter, the baker?" A crisp, professional voice inquired. "Yes, this is Peter," he replied, sitting up in bed. "Excellent. My name is Elizabeth Carter. I'm a local businesswoman, and I've heard about your situation. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a potential opportunity. Are you available this afternoon?" Peter's heart raced. "Yes, of course. I'm available anytime." "Wonderful. Let's meet at the park near the old fountain at 2 p.m. I look forward to our conversation, Peter." As he hung up, Peter felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since losing his job. He spent the morning pacing his apartment, alternating between excitement and nervousness. What could this opportunity be? At precisely 2 p.m., Peter arrived at the park. A well-dressed woman in her 50s was waiting by the fountain, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. She extended her hand as he approached. "Peter, I presume?" "I'm Elizabeth Carter. Thank you for meeting me." They sat on a nearby bench, and Elizabeth got straight to the point. "I've lived in this town for 30 years, Peter. I've seen businesses come and go, but I've never seen the community rally behind someone the way they're rallying behind you. It's quite remarkable." Peter blushed, unsure how to respond. Elizabeth continued, her eyes sharp and assessing. "I believe in investing in people who invest in their community. So, I have a proposition for you. How would you like to open your own bakery?" Peter's jaw dropped. "My own. But I couldn't possibly afford." Elizabeth held up a hand, smiling. "That's where I come in. I'm willing to provide the initial funding to get you started. A loan, of course, but with very favorable terms. What do you say?" As the implications of her offer sank in, Peter felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was everything he'd ever dreamed of. But could he really do it? Run his own bakery? Elizabeth seemed to sense his hesitation. "You don't have to answer right away. Think it over. But remember, Peter, sometimes life's biggest challenges are also our biggest opportunities." As they parted ways, Peter's mind was racing. He walked home slowly, barely noticing the familiar streets as he contemplated this unexpected turn of events. His own bakery, a chance to do things his way, to create a place that truly embodied the spirit of community he'd always believed in. By the time he reached his apartment, a sense of determination had settled over him. This was his chance to make a difference, to turn a moment of kindness into something lasting. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed Elizabeth's number. "Mrs. Carter, it's Peter. I've made my decision." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Peter threw himself into the process of opening his new bakery with unbridled enthusiasm. With Elizabeth's guidance and the community's support, he found the perfect location, a charming storefront on Main Street with large windows and a cozy interior. As word spread about Peter's new venture, volunteers from the community began to show up, offering their help. Tom, the mailman, spent his days off painting the walls a warm, inviting yellow. Sarah from the library helped Peter design a simple but eye-catching logo. Even Mrs. Thompson pitched in, donating some of her antique baking equipment to add character to the decor. One sunny afternoon, as Peter was arranging the newly installed display cases, the bell above the door chimed. He looked up to see the little boy he'd given bread to that fateful day at Higgins Bakery. "Hello there," Peter said warmly, crouching down to the boy's eye level. "I remember you. What's your name?" The boy shuffled his feet shyly. "I'm Danny," he mumbled. Peter smiled. "Well, Danny, it's nice to meet you properly. Are you excited about the new bakery?" Danny nodded enthusiastically. "Mom says you're a hero," he blurted out, then blushed. Chuckling, Peter shook his head. "I'm no hero, Danny. I just try to do what's right. Say, would you like to be my special helper today? I could use a hand arranging these cookie jars." Danny's face lit up, and he eagerly joined Peter behind the counter. As they worked, Peter learned that Danny's family had fallen on hard times recently, which explained why the boy had been so hungry that day. "You know, Danny," Peter said thoughtfully, "when we open, I might need some help around here after school. Would you be interested in a small job? With your parents' permission, of course." The boy's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? That would be awesome." As Danny left that day, clutching a small bag of cookie samples, Peter felt a renewed sense of purpose. This bakery wasn't just about him. It was about creating a space where kindness and community could flourish. The grand opening day arrived sooner than Peter expected. As he stood behind the counter of Peter's Place, as the townspeople had affectionately dubbed it, he could hardly believe how much had changed in such a short time. The bakery was packed, the lines stretching out the door and down the street. Peter worked tirelessly, his hands a blur as he boxed pastries, sliced bread, and rang up orders. Danny, true to his word, was there too, proudly wearing a small apron as he helped bag items and chat with customers. As the morning rush began to subside, Peter finally had a moment to catch his breath. He looked around at the bustling bakery, at the smiling faces of his neighbors and friends, and felt a lump form in his throat. This was more than he could have ever dreamed of. Elizabeth Carter appeared at his elbow, a rare smile on her usually serious face. "Well, Peter, I'd say this is a rousing success. How does it feel?" Peter shook his head, still somewhat in awe. "It's incredible, Mrs. Carter. I can't thank you enough for believing in me." She waved off his thanks. "You did this, Peter. Your kindness and your talent, that's what people are responding to. This town needed something like this, a place that represents the best of what a community can be." As they talked, Peter's eye was drawn to movement outside the window. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure standing across the street, staring at the bakery with an unreadable expression. It was Mr. Higgins. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Peter felt a complex mix of emotions, sympathy, a touch of lingering hurt, but mostly a sense of peace. He had moved on, and in doing so, had created something beautiful. Mr. Higgins held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly before turning and walking away. Peter watched him go, feeling a chapter of his life quietly close. Turning back to the warm, lively atmosphere of his new bakery, Peter felt a surge of gratitude. He had taken a risk, stood by his principles, and now he was surrounded by the fruits of his labor and the love of his community. As he rolled up his sleeves and prepared to dive back into work, Peter caught Danny's eye and winked. The boy grinned back, his face smudged with flour but beaming with pride. In that moment, Peter knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was exactly where he was meant to be. As weeks turned into months, Peter's place became a cornerstone of the community. The aroma of freshly baked goods wafted down Main Street each morning, drawing in regulars and newcomers alike. Peter's days were filled with the satisfying rhythm of kneading dough, decorating cakes, and chatting with customers. One crisp autumn morning, as Peter was pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven, Danny burst through the back door, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Peter! Peter! Guess what?" the boy exclaimed, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. Peter set down the tray and turned to Danny with a smile. "What's got you so worked up, buddy?" "I got an A on my math test." Danny proudly held up a paper covered in red check marks. "And it's all thanks to you." Peter raised an eyebrow, confused. "Me? I don't remember helping you with math." Danny rolled his eyes as if Peter was being particularly slow. "Not directly, silly. But ever since I started working here, I've gotten better at fractions and measurements. Baking is just math you can eat." Laughing, Peter ruffled Danny's hair. "Well, I'm glad I could help. This calls for a celebration. How about you help me frost these cinnamon rolls?" As they worked side by side, Peter marveled at how much Danny had grown in the past few months. The shy, hungry boy he'd first met had blossomed into a confident, hard-working kid. It warmed Peter's heart to know he'd played a part in that transformation. Later that afternoon, as Peter was restocking the display case, the bell above the door chimed. He looked up to see Elizabeth Carter entering, her usual business-like demeanor softened by a small smile. "Peter," she greeted him warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mrs. Carter. What brings you by today? Besides the best apple turnovers in town, of course." Peter winked. Elizabeth chuckled. "Well, I won't say no to a turnover, but I'm actually here on business. I've been looking over the bakery's numbers, and I must say, I'm impressed. You've exceeded all my expectations." Peter felt a surge of pride. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I couldn't have done it without your support and the community's enthusiasm." "Indeed," Elizabeth nodded, "which is why I think it's time we discuss the future. Have you given any thought to expansion?" Peter blinked in surprise. "Expansion? I hadn't really considered it. We're doing well, but nothing," Elizabeth interrupted gently. "Peter, you've created something special here. It's not just about the baked goods, though they are excellent. You've created a place of warmth and kindness. I think our neighboring towns could benefit from that too." As they sat down to discuss the possibilities, Peter's mind raced. Expansion meant more responsibility, more risk, but also more opportunity to spread the values he held dear. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Peter looked out the window to see a crowd gathering across the street. With a start, he realized they were in front of what used to be Higgins Bakery. The building had stood empty since Mr. Higgins had closed shop, unable to recover from the boycott. Curious, Peter stepped outside, Elizabeth following close behind. As they approached, they could see Mr. Higgins himself standing in front of the old bakery, looking lost and defeated. The crowd was murmuring, some pointing at the "for sale" sign that had just been put up. Peter felt a pang of sympathy. Despite their past, he couldn't help but feel for the man who had lost everything. As their eyes met across the street, Peter saw a flicker of recognition, followed by shame, in Mr. Higgins's gaze. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Peter found himself walking towards his former boss. The crowd parted, watching the scene unfold with bated breath. "Mr. Higgins?" Peter said softly as he reached the older man. "I'm sorry to see this." Mr. Higgins looked at him, his eyes clouded with regret. "Peter, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, about everything." Peter nodded, accepting the apology without words. Then, surprising even himself, he asked, "What will you do now?" Mr. Higgins shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. At my age, starting over seems impossible." Peter glanced back at his own thriving bakery, then at Elizabeth, who was watching the exchange with interest. An idea began to form in his mind, one that could change everything. "Mr. Higgins," Peter said slowly, "how would you feel about coming to work for me?" The crowd gasped. Mr. Higgins looked stunned. "You'd do that? After everything?" Peter smiled, extending his hand. "Everyone deserves a second chance. What do you say?" As Mr. Higgins reached out to shake Peter's hand, the crowd erupted in applause. Peter knew this decision would raise eyebrows, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. As he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, some surprised, some skeptical, but many nodding in approval, Peter felt a sense of peace settle over him. This was what his bakery was all about. Not just good food, but second chances, kindness, and the power of community to heal old wounds. The following weeks brought significant changes to Peter's place. Mr. Higgins, now a part of the team, started his first day with a mix of nervousness and determination. Peter had decided to ease him in gradually, starting with simple tasks in the back of the bakery. "Mr. Higgins," Peter said on that first morning, "why don't you start by helping with the inventory? It'll give you a chance to familiarize yourself with our ingredients and supplies." Mr. Higgins nodded, a look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Peter. I won't let you down." As the days passed, the atmosphere in the bakery shifted. At first, there was an undeniable tension. Danny, in particular, seemed wary of the new addition to the team. Peter often caught the boy watching Mr. Higgins with a furrowed brow, clearly remembering the events that had led to Peter's firing months ago. One afternoon, as Peter was teaching Danny how to make croissants, he decided to address the elephant in the room. "Danny," he began gently, "I've noticed you seem a bit uncomfortable around Mr. Higgins. Want to talk about it?" Danny's hand stilled on the dough. "It's just, he was so mean to you before. How can you trust him now?" Peter considered his words carefully. "You know, Danny, people can change. Sometimes they just need to be given the chance to do better. Mr. Higgins made a mistake, but he's trying to make amends now. That takes courage." The boy mulled this over, his young face serious. "I guess, but what if he does something mean again?" "Then we'll deal with it together," Peter assured him. "But I believe in giving people second chances. It's how we all learn and grow." As if on cue, Mr. Higgins appeared from the storage room, carrying a bag of flour. He paused, sensing the serious conversation. "Is everything all right?" he asked hesitantly. Peter nodded, then had an idea. "Actually, Mr. Higgins, Danny here is learning to make croissants. Would you like to join us? I seem to remember you had a special technique for getting them extra flaky." Mr. Higgins's face lit up. "Oh yes, it's all in how you fold the dough." "May I?" he asked, looking at Danny. After a moment's hesitation, Danny nodded. As Mr. Higgins began to demonstrate, his passion for baking shone through. Soon, Danny was asking questions, his initial wariness forgotten in the face of new knowledge. Peter stepped back, watching the scene with a smile. This was what he had hoped for, not just coexistence, but true reconciliation and teamwork. As the weeks went by, Mr. Higgins proved to be an invaluable addition to the team. His years of experience brought new ideas to the bakery, and his genuine efforts to make amends slowly won over even the most skeptical customers. One morning, as Peter was opening up shop, he found Elizabeth Carter waiting outside. "Mrs. Carter?" he greeted her, surprised. "You're here early." She smiled, a glint in her eye. "I wanted to catch you before the morning rush. I've been observing your operation, Peter, and I must say, I'm impressed, not just with your business acumen, but with your leadership. Peter felt a flush of pride. Thank you. It hasn't always been easy, but I think we're finding our rhythm. Elizabeth nodded, which is why I think it's time we revisited our conversation about expansion. I've found a perfect location in the next town over. It's a risk, of course, but I believe you're ready for it. Peter's mind raced with the possibilities. Expansion meant reaching more people, creating more jobs, spreading more kindness. But it also meant more responsibility, more challenges. It's a big step, he mused aloud. Indeed, Elizabeth agreed. But remember, Peter, you won't be doing it alone. You've built a strong team here. Mr. Higgins's experience could be invaluable in setting up a new location. And young Danny, well, he's showing real promise. This could be an opportunity for him to grow as well. As if summoned by their conversation, Mr. Higgins and Danny arrived together, deep in discussion about a new recipe they wanted to try. Seeing them work so well together, Peter felt a surge of confidence. You know what, Mrs. Carter? I think we're ready. Let's do it. Elizabeth beamed. Excellent. I'll start the paperwork today. Congratulations, Peter. You're about to become a true business mogul. As Elizabeth left, Peter turned to face his team. Mr. Higgins, Danny, gather around. We've got some exciting news to discuss. Looking at their eager faces, Peter felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This was a new chapter, not just for him, but for all of them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, with the same spirit of kindness and community that had brought them this far. As the morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the warm, inviting space of Peter's place, he couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something truly special. The news of Peter's place expanding to a neighboring town spread quickly, causing a buzz of excitement throughout the community. Peter found himself juggling the daily operations of his current bakery with the preparations for the new location. It was exhausting but exhilarating work. One crisp morning, as Peter was going over the blueprints for the new bakery, Mr. Higgins approached him with a thoughtful expression. Peter, he began, his voice tinged with nervousness, I've been thinking about the expansion. I'd like to volunteer to oversee the new location. Peter looked up, surprised. Really? That's a big responsibility, Mr. Higgins. Are you sure? Mr. Higgins nodded firmly. I am. I know I've made mistakes in the past, but I've learned so much working here. I want to prove that I can be the kind of leader you are. Kind, fair, and community-minded. Touched by Mr. Higgins's words, Peter felt a swell of pride. This was the kind of growth he had hoped for when he'd offered his former boss a second chance. All right, Peter agreed with a smile. Let's give it a try. We'll start with you overseeing the setup, and if all goes well, you can manage the new location once it's up and running. The joy on Mr. Higgins's face was palpable. Thank you, Peter. I won't let you down. As Mr. Higgins hurried off to share the news with the rest of the team, Danny appeared at Peter's elbow, his young face serious. Peter, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, if Mr. Higgins is going to the new bakery, does that mean I can't work with him anymore? Peter's heart warmed at the boy's concern. It was a far cry from the wariness Danny had shown towards Mr. Higgins just a few months ago. Well, Danny, Peter replied, crouching down to the boy's level. That depends. How would you feel about being my right-hand man here at this location? With Mr. Higgins at the new place, I'm going to need all the help I can get. Danny's eyes widened with excitement. Really? You mean it? Peter nodded, grinning. Of course, we'll have to clear it with your parents and make sure it doesn't interfere with your schoolwork, but I think you're ready for more responsibility. What do you say? Yes, Danny exclaimed, pumping his fist in the air. I won't let you down, Peter, I promise. As Danny scampered off to share the news with his parents, Peter couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd all come. The bakery had become more than just a business. It was a place of growth, second chances, and community. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Peter split his time between the original bakery and the new location, overseeing renovations and equipment installations. Mr. Higgins threw himself into the preparations with enthusiasm, often working late into the night to ensure everything was perfect. One evening, as Peter was locking up the original bakery, he noticed a figure standing across the street, looking at the Peter's Place sign with a wistful expression. It took him a moment to recognize Elizabeth Carter in the fading light. "Mrs. Carter," he called out, crossing the street to join her. "Is everything all right?" Elizabeth turned to him with a small smile. "Everything's fine, Peter. I was just reminiscing, I suppose. Do you know why I decided to invest in your bakery?" Peter shook his head, curious. "Years ago, when I was just starting out in business, I made a mistake. A big one. I was so focused on profits that I forgot about the human element. I lost everything." Elizabeth's voice was soft, her eyes distant. "But someone gave me a second chance, just like you gave Mr. Higgins. That's why I believed in you, Peter. You understand that a successful business isn't just about money, it's about people." Peter was stunned by this revelation. "I had no idea, Mrs. Carter. Thank you for sharing that with me." Elizabeth patted his arm gently. "You've created something special here, Peter. Not just a bakery, but a place where people can grow, learn, and find redemption. Never lose sight of that." As Elizabeth bid him goodnight and walked away, Peter stood for a moment, taking in the quiet street and the warm glow from his bakery's windows. He thought about Mr. Higgins, working tirelessly to prove himself at the new location. He thought about Danny, eager to take on more responsibility. He thought about all the customers whose days were brightened by a kind word and a warm pastry. Peter realized that in trying to create a simple bakery, he'd actually built something much more profound. A cornerstone of the community, a place of second chances and new beginnings. As he turned to head home, he felt a deep sense of gratitude and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Peter knew that with his team by his side and the support of the community, they could handle anything. The sweet smell of success, it turned out, was about more than just freshly baked bread. The grand opening day of the new Peter's Place location finally arrived. Peter stood outside the freshly painted storefront, taking in the festive atmosphere. Colorful balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, and a red ribbon stretched across the entrance, waiting to be cut. Mr. Higgins bustled about, making last-minute adjustments to the window display. His face was a mix of nervous excitement and pride. "Everything looks perfect, doesn't it, Peter?" he asked, straightening a tray of glistening pastries. Peter nodded, smiling. "It does indeed. You've done an amazing job, Mr. Higgins. This place looks even better than I imagined." As the crowd began to gather, Peter spotted familiar faces from their original town mingling with curious locals. Danny and his parents were there too, the boy practically vibrating with excitement. Elizabeth Carter arrived, looking elegant as always. She surveyed the scene with approval. "Well, Peter, are you ready to make it official?" Peter took a deep breath and nodded. Stepping forward, he addressed the waiting crowd. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to celebrate this special day with us. When we first opened Peter's Place, we had no idea how much it would grow or how many lives it would touch. Today, we're not just opening a new bakery, we're expanding our community, our family." He gestured to Mr. Higgins. "None of this would have been possible without the hard work and dedication of our team, especially Mr. Higgins, who will be managing this location. This bakery is a testament to the power of second chances and the strength of community spirit." Cheers erupted from the crowd as Peter picked up the oversized scissors. With a flourish, he cut the ribbon, officially opening the new Peter's Place. As people streamed in, oohing and ahhing over the warm, inviting interior and the mouth-watering displays, Peter felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Danny. "Peter," the boy said, his eyes wide, "do you think we could open a Peter's Place in my school someday? The cafeteria food is really bad." Peter laughed, ruffling Danny's hair. "One step at a time, buddy. But who knows? Maybe someday." Throughout the day, Peter moved between customers, chatting and ensuring everything ran smoothly. He couldn't help but notice the pride radiating from Mr. Higgins as he guided people through the bakery, explaining their specialties with enthusiasm. As the afternoon wore on, a hush fell over the crowd. Peter looked up to see the town's mayor entering the bakery, a broad smile on his face. "Peter!" the mayor boomed, striding over to shake his hand. "Congratulations on this beautiful new establishment. You know, we've been watching what you've done in your town, how you've brought people together. We could use more of that spirit here." Peter felt a blush creeping up his neck. "Thank you, sir. We're just trying to do our part." The mayor nodded approvingly. "Well, keep it up. In fact, I have a proposition for you. Our town's annual festival is coming up next month. How would you feel about Peter's Place being the official bakery for the event?" Peter's eyes widened. This was a huge opportunity, not just for business, but to really integrate into the new community. "We'd be honored, sir. Thank you." As the mayor left, promising to have his office send over the details, Peter caught Mr. Higgins' eye. The older man was beaming, clearly having overheard the conversation. "Can you believe it, Peter?" Mr. Higgins said, his voice filled with wonder. "From firing you to working for you, and now this. Life sure takes some unexpected turns." Peter clasped Mr. Higgins' shoulder warmly. "It sure does, but I think we're exactly where we're meant to be." As the day wound down and the last customers trickled out, Peter gathered his team, Mr. Higgins, the new staff, and even Danny, who had insisted on helping out. "I just want to thank you all," Peter said, his voice thick with emotion. "This day, this success, it belongs to all of us. We're not just co-workers, we're a family, and family looks out for each other." There were nods and smiles all around, a few misty eyes as well. As they began the cleanup, chatting and laughing together, Peter felt a deep sense of contentment wash over him. This new bakery was more than just an expansion of his business. It was a symbol of growth, of redemption, of the power of kindness to transform lives. As he looked around at his family, Peter knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with flour-dusted hands and open hearts. The sweet scent of success filled the air, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread, a promise of the good things yet to come. As the weeks flew by, both Peter's Place locations hummed with activity. The new bakery quickly became a local favorite, with Mr. Higgins at the helm, infusing the place with warmth and charm. Back at the original location, Peter and Danny worked side by side, their teamwork growing stronger each day. One crisp autumn morning, as Peter was teaching Danny the art of creating intricate sugar flowers for a wedding cake, the bell above the door chimed. A harried-looking woman rushed in, her eyes wide with panic. "Oh, thank goodness you're open!" she exclaimed, approaching the counter. "I'm in desperate need of help. I'm organizing a charity event for the Children's Hospital, and our caterer just canceled on us. The event is tomorrow, and we need desserts for 200 people. Is there any way you could help?" Peter exchanged a quick glance with Danny, who nodded eagerly. "We'd be happy to help," Peter said with a reassuring smile. "Can you tell us more about the event?" As the woman who introduced herself as Sarah explained the details, Peter's mind raced with ideas. This was a big order on short notice, but he knew they could handle it, with a little help. "Danny," Peter said, turning to the boy, "I think it's time for your first big project. How would you like to be in charge of coordinating this order?" Danny's eyes widened. "Really? You think I can do it?" Peter nodded confidently. "I know you can. You've learned so much and you have a great eye for detail. I'll be here to support you, but I want you to take the lead." Beaming with pride, Danny turned to Sarah. "Don't worry, ma'am. We've got this covered. Can you tell me about the theme of your event?" As Danny jotted down notes and brainstormed ideas with Sarah, Peter couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. The shy, hungry boy he'd met months ago had blossomed into a confident young baker with a kind heart. Once Sarah left, visibly relieved, the bakery burst into action. Peter called Mr. Higgins at the new location, explaining the situation and asking for reinforcements. Mr. Higgins didn't hesitate, promising to come over with extra staff to help. Throughout the day and well into the night, the bakery was a whirlwind of activity. Under Danny's surprisingly capable direction, they created an array of desserts, miniature fruit tarts garnished with edible flowers, chocolate mousse cups topped with gold leaf, and delicate macarons in the colors of the Children's Hospital logo. Peter watched with amazement as Danny coordinated the team, assigning tasks and ensuring quality with a maturity beyond his years. Even Mr. Higgins, who arrived with additional bakers, found himself taking instructions from the young boy. As dawn broke, casting a soft glow through the bakery windows, they put the finishing touches on the last batch of cupcakes. The display was a sight to behold. Hundreds of perfectly crafted desserts, each one made with care and love. Sarah arrived just as they were loading the last boxes into the delivery van. Her jaw dropped as she took in the spread. "This is incredible," she breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "The children and their families will be so touched. How can I ever thank you?" Danny stepped forward, flour dusting his cheeks. "Seeing the smiles on those kids' faces will be thanks enough," he said softly. "My little sister was in that hospital last year. I know how much a small treat can mean." Peter felt his heart swell with emotion. He hadn't known about Danny's sister, and the boy's words drove home once again the impact their work could have. As Sarah left with the desserts, Peter gathered his tired but happy team. "I'm so proud of all of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Especially you, Danny. You showed true leadership today." Mr. Higgins nodded in agreement. "Indeed. You know, Peter, I think we might be looking at the future owner of Peter's Place." Danny blushed but stood a little taller at the praise. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," he said. "We're a family, remember?" As they all shared a laugh, exhausted but satisfied, Peter realized that this night had been about more than just baking. It had been about nurturing talent, supporting the community, and showing that with teamwork and kindness, anything was possible. Later that day, as Peter was closing up shop, his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. It was a photo of a young girl in a hospital bed, her face lit up with joy as she bit into one of their cupcakes. The caption read, "You didn't just make desserts. You made magic. Thank you." Peter showed the photo to Danny, who was sweeping up. The boy's tired face broke into a wide grin. "This," Peter said softly, "this is why we do what we do." As they turned off the lights and locked up, Peter knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But with his growing family by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The sweet scent of success, it seemed, was flavored with compassion, growth, and the joy of making a difference, one dessert at a time. As autumn gave way to winter, both Peter's Place locations were bustling with holiday orders. The aroma of gingerbread and peppermint filled the air, and festive decorations adorned the windows. Peter found himself constantly moving between the two bakeries, overseeing operations and ensuring everything ran smoothly. One snowy evening, as Peter was closing up the original location, he noticed a familiar figure standing outside, peering in through the frosty window. It was Elizabeth Carter, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mrs. Carter," Peter called out, opening the door. "Please come in out of the cold. Is everything all right?" Elizabeth stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. "Peter, I hope I'm not interrupting. I have something important to discuss with you." Concerned by her serious tone, Peter ushered her to a table and quickly prepared 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. As they sat down, Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Peter, I've received an offer to sell my business interests and retire. It's a generous offer, and at my age, it's tempting. But," she paused, her eyes meeting Peter's, "it would mean selling my stake in Peter's Place as well." Peter felt his heart skip a beat. Elizabeth's investment had been crucial to getting the bakery off the ground. What would this mean for their future? "I see," he said carefully. "And what are you thinking of doing?" Elizabeth smiled softly. "That's why I'm here, Peter. I wanted to give you the first opportunity to buy my stake. You've built something remarkable here, something that goes beyond just business. I don't want to see that change." Relief washed over Peter, quickly followed by anxiety. "I'm honored, Mrs. Carter, but that's a significant investment. I'm not sure if I can manage it financially." "I thought you might say that," Elizabeth nodded, "which is why I've drawn up a proposal. You could buy my stake gradually, over time. I trust you, Peter. I know you'll make this work." As they discussed the details, Peter's mind raced with possibilities. Owning the bakery outright had always been a dream, but it came with added responsibilities. Could he handle it? Just then, the back door opened, and Danny poked his head in. "Peter? Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you had company. I just forgot my textbook." Seeing Danny reminded Peter of how far they'd all come. An idea began to form in his mind. "Danny, could you come here for a moment? And could you call Mr. Higgins and ask him to join us? I think we need to have a family meeting." Within the hour, Peter, Elizabeth, Danny, and Mr. Higgins were gathered around the table. Peter explained the situation and then took a deep breath. "I have a proposal," he said. "Mrs. Carter, I'd like to accept your offer, but with a twist. I want to split ownership between the four of us." Surprised looks were exchanged around the table. Peter continued, "Mr. Higgins, your experience is invaluable, and you've more than proven yourself with the new location. Danny, you're young, but you've shown incredible potential and dedication. I think together we could take Peter's place to new heights." Mr. Higgins's eyes glistened with emotion. "Peter, I don't know what to say. After everything, you trust me with this?" Peter nodded firmly. "Second chances, remember? That's what we're all about." Danny looked stunned. "But I'm just a kid. How could I be an owner?" Elizabeth chimed in, her face thoughtful. "We could set up a trust for Danny's share, managed by his parents until he's of age. It's unconventional, but then again, everything about Peter's place is unconventional." As they discussed the details late into the night, a sense of excitement filled the air. They were no longer just employees or investors. They were truly becoming a family, bound together by more than just business. Finally, as the clock struck midnight, they all stood ready to head home. But before they left, Peter raised his mug of now cold hot chocolate. "To Peter's place," he said softly. "Not just a bakery, but a home for second chances, new beginnings, and the sweetest kind of success." As they clinked their mugs together, Peter felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the beverage. Looking around at the faces of his newfound family, Elizabeth's wise smile, Mr. Higgins's grateful eyes, Danny's excited grin, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in a soft white glow. But inside Peter's place, the warmth of friendship, trust, and shared dreams created a different kind of magic, one that promised to sweeten their lives for years to come. As they stepped out into the snowy night, each lost in thoughts of the future, Peter realized that the bakery had become more than just his dream. It was now a shared vision, a testament to the power of kindness, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds of a chosen family. 5 years had passed since that snowy night when Peter, Mr. Higgins, Danny, and Elizabeth had become partners in Peter's place. The bakery had flourished beyond their wildest dreams, expanding to 5 locations across the state. Each shop maintained the warmth and community spirit that had made the original so special. On a bright spring morning, Peter stood in front of the original Peter's Place, a nostalgic smile on his face. Today was a big day. They were celebrating the bakery's anniversary, and the whole town had turned out for the event. Mr. Higgins, now semi-retired but still involved in the business, approached Peter with a warm handshake. "Can you believe how far we've come, my boy?" Peter chuckled. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure it's real." As they chatted, a sleek car pulled up, and Elizabeth Carter stepped out, looking as elegant as ever despite her advancing years. "Well, well," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "Looks like my investment paid off after all." The crowd parted as Danny, now a tall young man of 20, made his way to them. He'd just graduated from culinary school and was set to take on a larger role in the business. "Sorry I'm late," he said, slightly out of breath. "I was just finalizing the details for our new apprenticeship program." Peter beamed with pride. The apprenticeship had been Danny's idea, a way to give other young people the same opportunity he'd had. It was just one of the many ways Peter's Place continued to give back to the community. As they prepared to address the gathered crowd, Peter caught sight of a familiar face. The little boy he'd given bread to all those years ago, now a teenager himself. The boy gave a shy wave, which Peter returned with a warm smile. Taking the microphone, Peter cleared his throat. "Friends, neighbors, family, thank you all for being here today. When I first opened Peter's Place, I had no idea where this journey would take us. I just knew I wanted to create a place where kindness and community could flourish alongside good food." He paused, looking at his partners. "Along the way, I've learned that success isn't just about profit margins or expansion. It's about the lives we touch, the second chances we offer, and the community we build." Mr. Higgins stepped forward. "Peter taught me that it's never too late to change, to become a better person. This bakery gave me a second chance when I least deserved it, and I'll be forever grateful." Elizabeth nodded in agreement. "And he showed me that sometimes the best investment isn't in stocks or property, but in people and their dreams." Danny was the last to speak, his voice filled with emotion. "Peter's Place isn't just a bakery, it's a family. It's where I grew up, where I learned not just how to bake, but how to lead with kindness and integrity." As the crowd applauded, Peter felt a lump in his throat. He raised his hand for quiet. "We have one last announcement to make. In honor of our anniversary, we're establishing the Peter's Place Foundation. This foundation will provide support to local food banks, fund culinary scholarships for underprivileged youth, and continue our commitment to making our community a sweeter place for everyone." The cheers that erupted were deafening. As Peter looked out at the sea of familiar faces, customers who had become friends, employees who had become family, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Later, as the celebration wound down, Peter found himself alone in the bakery. He ran his hand along the worn counter, remembering all the moments that had led to this day. The challenges, the triumphs, the laughter, and even the tears. All had played a part in shaping Peter's Place into what it had become. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. It was Danny, holding a small, beautifully decorated cake. "I made this for you," he said, setting it down, "to say thank you for everything." Peter smiled, touched by the gesture. "No, Danny, thank you. All of you. This dream, it wouldn't have been possible without each person who's been a part of our story." As they shared the cake, Peter realized that while the bakery had indeed changed many lives, it had perhaps changed his the most. It had taught him the true meaning of success, not measured in dollars or accolades, but in the strength of the bonds formed, the kindness shared, and the lives touched. Outside, the sun was setting on another day, but for Peter's Place, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with the promise of more dreams to be realized, more lives to be touched, and more sweetness to be shared. The story of Peter's Place, like the best recipes, would continue to evolve, always staying true to its core ingredients of kindness, community, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.